Hello semua. Today I'm going to demonstrate on how to mix gypsum, or sometimes people call it plaster of Paris. Right? The gypsum that I'm using today is from Thailand, so it's kind of specially made for making molds, ceramic molds. Okay, I have measured 100 gram of water in here and 150 gram of the gypsum from Thailand. So I'm gonna pour the water into this bigger container. Okay, and then I will sprinkle the gypsum slowly. You shouldn't like just dump everything in. Usually that creates a lot of lumps later on. So you kind of want to sprinkle it. You gradually build it up. Okay, and spread it around. And also try not to agitate the container as you're mixing, because as soon as you start agitating the powder and the water, like actually mixing it, that would start the setup of the chemical reaction to make it start reacting and becoming hard into a plaster. Okay, so kind of do it slowly like that until all the powder is gone. So the proportion, from what I've read, from what most people tell me, it's 100 to 150. So 100 water to 150 by weight of the gypsum, right? 1 and 1.5. Okay, and then after you dump all the thing, let it kind of set up a little bit. Let the water kind of soak it up slowly. Don't mix it up yet. That would also help to make a better cast. The gypsum won't be clumpy. Okay. Since it's kind of little, I'm just gonna, and for the sake of time, I'm just gonna start kind of spreading it around, make it faster, and start mixing it. Okay, so this should be, by weight, this should be the right amount of gypsum. Anything dirty or some kind of whatever impurity, if you see it on the surface, just scoop it out and throw it out. Okay, just mix it up until everything is even, no clumps. We'll go back and forth. Any spills, use sponge, scoop it up while it's still liquid form, and wash it in a bucket of water. Okay? So don't wash it into the sink. Don't throw away gypsum mixture into the sink. That might clog your sink. You just kind of keep stirring until you get it all even. Most plasters and gypsum, when they're starting to react to become hard, it will usually give off some kind of heat. Okay, you'll feel the gypsum starting to warm up. Some of them, the quick setting one, can get pretty hot, so be careful of that. Don't use that to cast living things, human beings, animals, because the heat sometimes can be quite intense and can actually give you a burn. So make sure you know what you're doing, you research the type of gypsum you're using, experiment first on a small batch, see what is the right proportion, how you make it work before you actually use it on your project. Okay. There are usually two ways to cast like a one-piece mold like this. One is you're actually getting the master and put it in a container that is almost the size. Probably put like a 1 centimeter margin around it. Okay, build it up. You can put another type of clay underneath, press it down so there's no air underneath, and then you just pour the gypsum in there. Okay, give it about 1 centimeter thickness also from the top, and that would become your one-piece press mold when the gypsum hardens. Okay. The other way is you mix it and you let the gypsum kind of start to set, where it actually starting to harden a little bit, like gel, and then you kind of just pour it on top, like build up amount on top of the piece. So that way you don't have to build up the wall, the container around it. All right. But if you start pouring the gypsum and the gypsum is already actually got too hard, that might be a problem where you start having missing parts where the air is trapped. Right. So this way is a bit more risky, but faster. Okay, since you don't have to build up anything, just kind of mix it up. You see that it's starting to thicken up a bit. Let's see if it's warming up yet. Not really. The way you store the gypsum is very important, that the gypsum doesn't get any moisture into the container, because if you're soaking up moisture from the air, it might make the gypsum become a dust. It doesn't want to set up anymore. Okay, it has absorbed moisture, so it doesn't want to react anymore and become hard. So keep the gypsum dry. When you buy, make sure you buy a fresh gypsum, not something that's old stock, because in the storage it might have absorbed some kind of moisture. I'm gonna let this sit a little bit to let it start clumping up. All right. You can kind of put a little bit of on the surface, and it's still like this. That's to make sure that you're not trapping any air bubble, and also try to. This is to ensure that you get all the details of the surface. Okay. Try not to trap air bubbles. So kind of brush it. Make sure you're not trapping air bubble. I can do that. Okay. The objective is trying to build up like a half a centimeter to 1 centimeter thickness all over the piece that you're casting. And that will give you enough strength for it to be used as a press mold later on. When you're casting gypsum, also usually it's a good idea to have another container ready for all the excess gypsum that you're not using. So you can cast it into something else and maybe carve into the gypsum. That also can become another stem. Right. Okay, just gonna let that set up like this. Excess gypsum, I'm gonna cast it into this other container right here. You see that it's starting to set up, starting to harden. Whatever things that you're using that has gypsum on it, just wash it before it gets hardened. It'll be easy to wash. Okay. Once it's hardened, usually it's harder. You have to kind of scrape it. So if you want to reuse anything that you're using, wash it before it actually hardens. Sometimes to minimize air bubbles in the gypsum, you kind of tap it in. So let the air kind of come up into the surface. Okay, so we can reuse that. The water that you use to wash anything with gypsum, it's usually better to just let the gypsum settle down and then skim off all the water that's on the top, right? Later on, the sedimentary gypsum, let it harden, dry up, then you scrape it off in a plastic bag. That's what you threw away. Okay, so don't just like flush it down the sink with all the gypsum water powder. It might build up into your in your plumbing and actually clog up your plumbing. So the safest way to throw this out is just let everything settle down, throw away all the water that's on the top, let whatever settle down, harden, dry up, and that scrape it into the plastic bag or a trash bag and throw it out. Okay. So that's it. You just let this set up. This gypsum should set up in about 10-15 minutes, and then I'll show you the result later on. Okay. Bye for now. Okay, hello again. It has been around 8-10 minutes since before. I have let it sit for about 8-10 minutes now. I've started to cut off this part while so it's already dry to the touch, right? And you can actually see it as after 5 minutes or so, the gypsum, you can actually start seeing like the sheen, the sheen on the surface start to disappear and become drier and drier. Okay, so now it's kind of hard to the touch. It's still kind of damp. You can still feel that it's kind of damp. All right. This part also about 2 minutes ago, I started cutting off the top part so I can take this out just to see how the cast is. But as I was cutting the side, I kind of put pressure on the gypsum, so it might have cracked a little bit. It hasn't set completely yet, and I put pressure, so we'll see. Okay, let me cut this off completely and just like snap it maybe. Let's tear this apart. Okay. The sides here have undercuts, that's why it's locking, it doesn't want to come out. So if you can get when you're casting something, make sure there are no undercuts, right? So nothing catch on the gypsum, and it can come off much easier. Okay. Oh, it's starting to warm up now. I can feel it. Well, I'll leave it to dry some more. Let's try taking this one off. So sometimes the gypsum will dry much faster where the surface is not sticking on anything, right? The surface is actually exposed to air. That would be able to make it dry much faster. Okay, I'm just gonna put some pressure, see the whole thing kind of slide off, and there we go. That is the mold, and it still stayed together. So I'm just gonna try to pop it off. You see this over here, it's kind of thin. So if you see that happening, you can kind of mix more gypsum and kind of build up on the part that's thin, just to make sure so your mold have some strength to it to be used later on. Because later on you'll be putting some kind of pressure with a soft clay for press molding. Okay, so that's basically my tip. Let me try prying it a bit. Usually I don't really care whether I'm gonna destroy the master, because once you get a good mold, that can be used to create many more of this, whatever this thing is. If I let it dry up somewhere, it usually will just pop out, provided that whatever you design, the master has no undercuts to lock the gypsum in place. Okay, and just now keep in mind also that when I'm doing this, I didn't put any release on the master. Sometimes it's better if you coat it first with like some kind of oil, Vaseline, cooking oil, right? That gives a separation release agent. Okay, in this case just now I didn't do any of that, so it's just plain bone dry clay, natural clay that I put plaster on top. If you want to kind of pry it open gently, I might just let it sit somewhere and let it dry somewhere. Okay? I'm gonna take out the heat gun, start heating it, and I'll show you when I'm able to pop it out. Okay, so that's a lot harder than I anticipate. So if you want to do this, I suggest you actually put the release agent on the master. That would make it so much easier for that thing to pop out from the plaster. Okay, this one, because the clay was natural clay and it's bone dry, so when you're actually putting the wet plaster on top of it, it soaks up the water and become kind of like the heart again. All right, so that makes it really sticky. So that's kind of a pain in the butt to take out. So I would suggest definitely put Vaseline first or something. So I managed to take it off finally is by picking on the sides first and then kind of pick on the middle and popping it out, but in the process I destroyed the master. Okay, but it doesn't really matter as long as the mold is actually successful. Okay, which it kind of looks like it is. So all this clay can be washed off later on when the plaster really sets. Once the plaster sets, it's waterproof, so you can wash it. But for you to actually start printing, it'll be easier when the plaster is dry. Yeah, especially if you're using slip casting. Okay, slip casting needs the plaster mold to be completely dry. Okay, or you won't get a successful cast from it. Okay, so I'm gonna wash this and kind of use an old toothbrush to brush off all this clay. This clay will all washed off since it's not fired clay. The plaster, it's already set, so it will be waterproof, so I can wash this with no problem. Okay, so I just have to clean all that up. And then the next, this one also I managed to pop it out, but with a lot of hardship also, because there's a lot of undercuts and locking the things in place. But you can see how well plaster will copy whatever the design is, right? Except this part here got broken a little bit, but that's about it. So things like this, usually I make a bunch of these and I can carve into it, and that can be used as a mold right away, like a press mold. Okay, so but that kind of carving, it's harder because you're thinking it the other way around, like inverted, right? You're carving and you don't know how deep it is, unless you have a lot of experience, and maybe you can do it really well. Yeah. But for abstract designs and whatever, you can just carve into this and they'll be fine for using as a press mold. So I'm gonna wash this off and then I'll come back and show you by pressing some moist clay into this and see how good a cast we can get. Okay. Okay, so this is how I'm washing the remaining clay in the plaster. Make sure your brush that you're using is kind of stiff, but not too stiff, that it's actually scratching the plaster and taking away all the details. Okay, but it should be stiff enough to get rid of all the clay that is sticking on it. There are some air bubbles. You see that little holes? So those are all air bubbles. If you're really concerned about those, you can, when you're brushing the plaster on the surface of your master, use a softer brush and kind of do it over and over so that there are no air bubbles on the surface that's trapped. Just now I did it kind of rush, so I was just trying to do it fast for you guys to see. Or if you're really professional, you can buy one of those vacuum pumps. So you vacuum after you mix the plaster, you put it in the vacuum pumpers, get rid of all the air, then pour it out on the master. Okay. So you can see that the plaster already set and it's not, it becomes waterproof, which means that you can do this without taking away the plaster. Keep in mind that plaster molds are not forever, so the more casting you do, over time you'll lose some of the details until it's finally become not good enough for your production. So if you want it to keep the quality of the print, to keep all the details, some people would use this and cast silicone rubber into it first, and then the silicone rubber becomes the master. Okay, so next time if your plaster already becoming worn out and all the details are disappearing, you cast a new plaster from the silicone that you have. So they would do that. That becomes like the master mold, or the master, the master of to keep the quality constant.